when I achieved my black belt, it was the best day of my life up to that time. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, it was the first time I really achieved anything meaningful, and certainly the first time I was recognized for achieving something meaningful. So my master had a gift for me, and it was this beautiful heavyweight black belt, deepest, darkest shade of black. It was so beautiful. So over time, it fades, it turns gray. That happens to the best of us. The black belt frays away. When it starts wearing out, the black belt frays away. Now underneath, on purpose, there's another belt. It's a white belt. So if you keep that belt over the years, and that belt's fraying away, and you see that every time we tie that belt on is to remind us, right? Approach each day with a sense of wonder, curiosity, passion, enthusiasm. I want to be better at the end of today than I am beginning the day. That's beginner's mind. And like I said, that's the mind of the true master. The funny thing is I used to work in television production too, and we had this guy we were grooming as a meteorologist, and he was horrible through all the rehearsals and everything, and so we got him on for his first live show, and we figured, oh my God, we're going to have to cover for him, do something, right? Red light hits, and you'd have thought the guy was doing it for 40 years. It was crazy. He complete opposite of most people that have that red light fear.
Yeah.
As soon as that light went on, man, he was fantastic.
That's wild.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Yeah.
I've experienced some of that where, like actors kind of fumble with their lines and they don't really get it together until they have the audience. So it must be something similar to that. But that's so cool that you were in production. So tell me a little bit about that. How did you get into production?
Oh, God, needed a job. Yeah. I'd been doing I went to school off and on. That's part of the backstory, because I dropped out of school a couple of times. But I was in school for communications broadcast, and then I went to into radio. And back then, this was like 1980s. Like I said, the through line was music, but needed a job, in between, off the road and stuff. So it was radio. It was kind of cool. And that led into audio production at a television station. And then from there, I ended up writing copy for commercials and becoming a producer. And then I got laid off when cable killed us. And then that's around the time when the whole martial arts trip was starting to get a little more serious. So,
yeah. Well, what a cool background.
Well, everything's an accident. Everything's an accident. Truly, it's just.
Would you say that it all contributed to what you do now and your insight and experience as a leader?
Oh, absolutely. But it's funny because people, when people hear my background, they say, oh, you had a lot of adventures. And I said, yeah, I sure did. It's really cool. But it's not because I was confident. It's not because I was out looking for them. It's just, like I said, a lot of times I just needed a job. And I just said, hey, I'll try it. I'll try this. More out of courage than confidence. I learned how to substitute courage for confidence, because courage doesn't mean you're afraid. Courage means you do what you need to do when you are afraid, right? I think the absence of fear isn't courage. The absence of fear is stupidity. So, but I just kept doing things. And then I for a long time, I was a shiny object chaser too. So let's see, that looks interesting. But music was always the through line. It was, that was kind of the thing that kept my head together. But that's also part of what made it, how would you say, it wasn't the cause of my drug addiction, but it made the drugs very accessible in that time, around 1980s. I was doing mostly punk music then, and it was a pretty heavy drug scene around that. So it made it easy for me to medicate myself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
When you're part of that culture, it's easy to get swept up into all of the facets and elements, regardless of whether it's positive or negative.
No, it was hard. It was hard not to do it then. I mean, it was just all around all the time. And it's weird to say this, but it wasn't always, it turned into a self-destructive path for me, but it wasn't always that way. There was a lot of partying and things there's a little more angst to it now, I see, because I still work with kids that, have issues around that. And there's a little more anger associated with it now, where for us, I think it was more of an escape thing. Not that it was any less of a problem, right? But yeah, I don't know. I'm getting old. I'm sounding like an old guy now, aren't I?
wise and experienced, which is
There you go. I like
I'm
that.
excited to talk to you too because we describe yourself as the dropout to black belt now, right? And before we hit record, you were talking about your band and how you've rediscovered music
Yeah.
in, obviously a healthier way for you too, but just how cool that you have been able to pursue and return to different passions and develop yourself through the ups and the downs. So tell us a little bit, continue telling us about your journey, Jim, because I feel like, we sometimes have the idea that a leader is just like, automatically escalating in terms of responsibility and growth. And you're describing what I feel like is probably true for more people than not, a very nuanced journey that, shiny object syndrome or no, you have a lot of different interests and hobbies and passions that combine to make you who you are today.
I think if you give people time, you'll find a lot of nuance, like you just said. And in fact, it's interesting because at an event just a few weeks ago, someone was challenging the stereotype of what a drug addict is, right? And I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. But I said, you'd be surprised. I said, we work with C-level groups, especially in small workshops and whatnot. And I said, a lot of times we run into people, because I share my story, people will be very open with me sometimes. And, along with everything you just said, there's also the stress and the uncertainty and all these things that go along with leadership responsibility, right? And sometimes people, we can look from the outside and look at somebody and say, wow, they must be happy. They have everything. And it's kind of cliche to even think that, right? But a lot of times people aren't. If they aren't fulfilled in what they do, if they really, don't have genuine meaning and purpose in their life, then it doesn't matter what level of material achievement they have, right? There still can be a lot of frustration. Or, hey, sometimes things just don't go the way they wanted them to, right? And that can cause a lot of stress. A lot of people are facing that. We certainly saw a lot of it during COVID. So, yeah, there's no prototypical addict, right? Um, whether it's drugs or alcohol or anything else, it's people trying to, just trying to deal with things. So, I don't know. I'm just a roundabout way to say don't judge, right? It's you never know what people are going through. But as far as my trip went, I mean, a lot of issues related to growing up and whatnot, and relationship with my dad and things like that. So I was susceptible to it. And when I was in the music, like I said, in the 1980s, it was everywhere at that time, And so, that's what I kind of chose to ease the pain, so to speak, right? And yeah, and that caused me to drop out of college a couple of times, which was kind of tough. I got talked back into college the second time by a wonderful person. Um, she was one of the nuns at St. Joseph's College in Maine, and she was the academic dean, and just a worldly person, really wonderful person, a caring person. So she talked me back in, much to her chagrin. Yes, I then left, but she's somebody that I admired and still influences my life. She's a really cool person. And at any rate, yeah. So when I go and speak now, I often say I struggled with the idea that this was a pretty lousy resume for somebody that's working in leadership. And I came to understand that no, it was a pretty useful one because, among a lot of other things, leadership is about transformation, right? In fact, that's one of the most important aspects of leadership. Not only transformation for yourself, which you should be engaged in at all times, but what are you really doing? What's a leader's job? It's to transform. Well, it's to transform me into we, get people to rally behind a cause or a purpose. You need to constantly transform your organization, the people around you. If you're not changing, you're dying, especially these days, right? So that's what it's all about. So I came to realize, well, who better to talk about transformation than someone that had to learn how to do it in order to survive, right? So, this isn't said in an egotistical way at all, but I've come to a very deep and intimate understanding about what transformation is all about. But I ain't done yet.
I love that mindset. I take on that similar kind of approach. I like to say God's not finished with me yet, but it's
You know,
yeah, the
yeah.
idea
A
I
friend called
said.
me after an event. Was this last year, the year before? And we'd actually it was a breakout, and we'd worked through some exercises. You've probably been through similar exercise. I was asking people, where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years? Right? It's a good exercise to go through. It's pretty cliche, but it's still a powerful exercise. And this person caught me afterwards and she said, okay, wise guy, you've been asking us what we're going to do. How about you? Where are you going to be in 5 years? And I thought about it and I said, well, I have no idea, but it sure as hell isn't going to be where I am right now. I'm not going to be the same person I am right now. And that's what I learned. One of the greatest gifts my martial arts life taught me was this: perfection is not a destination. It's a never ending process. And the more we can embrace that process and enjoy it, then we become better leaders and better people.
Absolutely. What wonderful just mindset and philosophy. I love that you're sharing that with us, because that's part of the reason for this podcast, and the guests that I look for having that understanding that we're constantly improving, that Kaizen understanding of constant steady improvement. And it takes work, takes effort. Sometimes it can be fun and sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging depending on what it is. But that's where the ups and the downs take place. I wanted to chat a little bit with you, or a lot about with you, the idea of a human-centric leadership and approach. That's something that is really important, I know, for you. And you were talking about the transformative type of leader, which in my mind, any kind of leader should, I use the word should, but that's a nebulous word, maybe ought to be considering the human approach. And yet there are more types of leaders, especially the transformative, that are putting that human focus into their daily practice and their mindfulness around what their actions are doing to help support other people. And I long build up here, but I say all that to say, let's talk about what does it mean to be a transformative leader? And then when you are that type of leader, how are you focusing on the human? Because you've pointed out in several of your writings, and I know in other podcasts, just how we're in a very heavy technological age. AI is the hottest topic, and it can cause a lot of distance between a leader and their team member. So how do we get that connection back in that relationship? Yeah.
Well, that's really what we're working to avoid, right? I mean, because these technologies can be very exciting too. And part of it is actually, this is going to sound weird, but you kind of have to embrace the AI with a human perspective. In fact, that's how it's designed to work, right? I was talking to an AI expert and I was kind of embarrassed because I said, well, first of all, I thank it when I'm done with the title. You do too? Cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
I actually asked it one time. I said, do other people thank you? And they said, oh, yes. And I appreciate it as much as I can, not being human, right? Which I thought was an interesting response that they programmed in. I mean, that was kind of interesting. But yeah, like any technological disruption, and this one arguably it's probably going to be the biggest one we've seen in our lifetime. So we've got to look at it from two angles. First of all, is it going to displace people from a lot of jobs? Yeah, I think it is. How fast that happens is going to be, what we have to watch for, and what types of jobs is it going to replace. So I think the best thing, well, just like any fighter that's going in the ring, I mean, the best thing we can do, the only thing we can really control is our training and preparation. So I'm really encouraging people to embrace it as much as possible. Learn about AI, learn how it can enhance your job, your work, your career, or take you on a different path, or find something to do that AI has nothing to do with, I mean, I've done a lot of work in trades. I was raised to be in the trades. And right now, hey, you want to make a fortune, be a plumber or an electrician, right? And so far, AI can't do that, and people don't realize. I mean, I'm a big fan of Mike Rowe and whatnot. He's cool about exploring how creative these different jobs are, right? People look at. I hate that we've vilified the trades for so long. They're such creative and dynamic vocations, right? And should be honored, really. But anyway, back to the theme. Yeah, how do we keep it human? Part of it is, you're right, there are more leaders. I think I'm very encouraged. There are more leaders who are really embracing this. I think there always were a lot. I have the luxury now of kind of preaching to the choir most of the time. I think I bring more value when a company's already, or an organization's already in alignment with this philosophy, right? Because we always need maintenance, we always need encouragement, and we always want to learn and grow and expand on these things. And it's simple. It's not easy. We have to constantly be reminded. We have to pay attention to simple practices that help us connect with one another. These are the things that get pushed aside sometimes when other priorities take hold, or there's urgency or emergency. So that's part of the journey. It's, like I said, simple, not easy. Um, and then the other part of it is, you probably got a correspondence from me or my team that said something to the effect that the age of command and control is over, right? It's dead. And I don't know if it ever was very effective. I mean, the great leaders throughout history, when we study them, were the people who were able to touch people's hearts, not just their heads, right? Inspire people. Inspiration is a big part of our theme. And these aren't just pretty words. I mean, when I talk about inspiration and empowerment and guidance, these are disciplines. They're not just pretty words. These are things that require a lot of hard work, and they require us embedding these things in our life, in our practice, right? Not just checking them off on a to-do list. Oh yeah, I did something nice for somebody last week. No, we have to really embed these things in our lives. So the more we can do that, the more we can circle and do that. And that requires support. It requires us helping one another to do that. And sometimes to call attention to us when we stray from it, right? Because that happens. I understand that. Admiral Grace Hopper said it so beautifully. She said, management is about things, leadership is about people, right? I think that's right on. I've never heard it said any better than that. Management's important. We've got to take care of the bottom line. We've got to take care of those things if we're going to stay alive and eat. But, which one's more important? I spoke at a conference not too long ago. It was kind of interesting because they couldn't have set me up any better. I was reading their journal before I went out on stage, and there was an article that this person had written, one of the leaders in their association, and it was all about him losing the human connection. And it was so cool because he said, I realized that I have to put my people first because I lost sight of that. And I looked out my window and saw a whole yard full of equipment with nobody to run it. You see? And people have choices these days. So if for no other reason, if you're not getting inside people's hearts, if you're not really, and believe me, you have to do this authentically. If you don't care, don't bother. Right?
Yeah.
But we know for a fact, now we know it for a fact because Harvard Business Review actually just did a great study, one of their big studies. I wrote an article. I said, I'm going to sue them for plagiarism. Why I'm not going to sue them. But these ideas, I mean, they're not mine either. These are thousands of years old. These are part and parcel of us as human beings. But we need to continually, like I said, revisit them, make them disciplined. But anyway, the way I say it is this: people perform at their best when and only when they know their leaders care, when their work has meaning, and when they have the chance to learn, grow, and develop. Pick up the December, January edition of Harvard Business. And like I said, they did a big study and came to almost verbatim that same conclusion, right?
Yeah.
But I said, no, I can't sue him anyway because Lao Tzu said the same thing 2,000 years ago. So these are not new ideas.
You're ahead of HBR.
That felt really good. That felt
yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
College dropout, and I beat them to the punch.
Absolutely.
But I'm grateful for the validation. I really am. I'm glad they validated these things.
Well, I was going to say, it is that validation of like, yeah, those of us that are paying attention are aware of what's important and what's needed. And some of us have been able to experience that from transformative leaders in our lives and then know what that looks like. But I'm thinking about the folks that are either curious, well, maybe they haven't had someone in their life like that, or maybe they're trying to figure out, how do I have that kind of transformative talk with someone?
Oh, yeah.
Like thinking of, okay, and I'm just putting myself in their shoes, but is it that sort of St. Crispin's Day, Henry V speech where you're rallying the troops, or is it happening on a very small, more intimate one-on-one situation where the nuance is there? And how do you coach someone to be a transformative coach to their people?
But your history. That's cool. Well, no, you don't have to make the grand speech. I mean, the most inspirational thing that any leader can do is just to be a good example, to model the behavior you expect from others, right? And when you do that, it's interesting too. I always ask this question at workshops. I ask people to think about, a moment or a person in their lives that really inspired them, really touched their hearts, really, took them to a different level. And then I ask them who they're thinking about. And very seldom, sometimes I'll say, now take the celebrities off your list. But even if I don't, very seldom will anybody say somebody famous. They say a teacher, a coach, their parent, an aunt, an uncle, somebody like that, a teammate. The people that are around us every day are the people that touch our hearts more intimately and more often. Now, there's nothing wrong with being moved by the grand speech. I certainly enjoy that when it happens, but that's kind of an accident, isn't it? I mean, those are special moments in history. The timing has to be right. The place has to be right. The opportunity has to be there. More important is what we do every day and how do we share that with one another. Because I'll tell you this, when people challenge me to summarize all of this in one thought, I lean on this one. I say leadership, above all, leadership is sharing. A leader shares. The rest of the conversation, the rest of what we're talking about is just about what we're willing to share and how we're going to do it. Now, that can get very technical. We can talk about our willingness to share power, authority, autonomy, things like that, right? But also probably not probably about it, the three most valuable assets any leader would have. And I'm going to say everyone's a leader. We could come back to that in a second, but it's respect, trust, and loyalty, right? And these things are a little less tangible, but they're actually more important. They're more valuable. And once in a while, somebody will challenge me on that and say, "Oh, you're heading down that soft skills road, right?" So I hate that. I even slam the desk like, "What are you kidding me? I hate that soft skill." No. Think about it this way. What can you possibly accomplish without the respect, the trust, and the loyalty of the people you serve, right? And if you don't have it, you're not performing at optimal levels. So these are the things, if we can focus on those, if we can focus as disciplines, how do we inspire people? How do we empower them? How do we guide them? Which is one of the things you had just touched on. And we work always to earn their respect, their trust, and loyalty. If we can stay focused in that lane, we're in pretty good shape. Now, it's a long-about way to say sometimes we have to go outside our domain to get that inspiration, right? And we have to seek it. Take the guide part. Technically, we can call it mentoring, right? So I always ask people in the room, are you being mentored by somebody right now? I'll ask you that question, right? I'm sure you probably are. And I always am, usually by more than one person. My mentors change as my needs and my interests change, certainly. And then I have some that are lifelong mentors. But we need that. And it doesn't have to be in your domain. In fact, sometimes it's more valuable for it not to be in your domain. And I think that's why, honestly, I think that's why people invite me in, because I'm coming at it from a different angle. I was never the CEO of a big company. I've always had small businesses, micro businesses. And most of what I share comes from my experience as a sensei, right? From trying to help people achieve in martial arts. So I think that gives people permission, if you want to call it that, right? To look a little outside their world and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, maybe this is a little different perspective. You might have heard the same thing. We've all been through that, right? We'll hear the same thing from people familiar or people close to us or people in our industry, but then a different voice comes in, right? I don't know if you have kids, but every time I ask people that, yeah, I said this a million times. How come Sensei says it and it makes sense? I say, don't worry about it. If you hadn't said it the million times when Sensei said it, it wouldn't have gone in all the way. So
yeah, I
but
don't
that
have
different
kids,
voice,
but
right?
I think of it like, a prophet isn't welcome in their hometown.
Right. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
even as the child of parents, I know that as we grow too, sometimes our family doesn't listen to us.
Yeah,
So, like
right.
whether it's health or just advice or counsel. But I love your way of talking about it, because you're right. I feel like it's the sort of understanding that you can get insight from other functions or
Yeah.
industries or people with different kinds of points of view and background that can
Yeah.
amplify what maybe the people more close to you have been telling you for a
Right.
while.
No,
Yeah.
in two places people don't think about it. In fact, sometimes people are hesitant to solicit advice from people they consider their subordinates, if you want to call it that, right? Sometimes that's where sometimes where the greatest wisdom is, especially if you're a relatively young manager, let's say, a young leader, and you have people on your front lines that have been there their entire lives. That they have the experiential capital that you're looking for. In fact, one guy is a young guy. It's a long story, but I remember he was a little hesitant about seeking that input from the ranks, so to speak. And he said, "Well, they're gonna. If I ask them for advice, they're gonna think I don't know what I'm doing." I said, "But you don't." I mean, he was doing a good job, but he came right out of business school, went into management. He had no idea what these guys were doing on the front lines, right? He needed that. So there's one place where you can get mentorship, and that's very valuable. The other place is your competition. We learned that as fighters. If we're going to improve as fighters, we got to seek out the person. Right? You're not going to get better by fighting somebody who's not as good as you are. So we're always, especially in training. My friends in pro boxing will take umbrage to this sometimes because there's a little bit of business maneuvering with that, right? But when they're training, a lot of times these boxers will spar against really top flight trainers. Muhammad Ali was famous for top flight sparring partners, right? A couple of them beat Ali later in his career, didn't they? You see, so those are the people you want to test yourself with, and they become a reflection of you, and that can happen in business too. I've seen it very often happen where don't fear the competition, embrace them. If you're both working really hard and you're competing fairly, then you're both going to improve. And what's wrong with that? But to do that, to embrace that, you really have to have, what did Stephen Covey call it? The abundance mentality, right? Don't worry about what I don't have. Let's be grateful for what I do have. Lesson I learned as a drug addict, by the way.
Well, a wonderful lesson for all of us too, because if we are putting limitations on ourselves, whether it is resource limitations or knowledge, capacity, then we're always going to feel a lack of, versus I know that I could do more. I don't know maybe what all of that might be, but I have yet to reach my full potential. I might not even ever reach it if it's constant, steady progress, and progress, practice makes progress. The idea that,
Perfection's not a
yeah,
destination.
exactly what you were saying earlier, and reminding us again now. Yeah, the journey that we're on is going to be a process that we have to enjoy as we're traveling it, and we don't know maybe what that will even look like you're saying. You can plan for your next 5 years, but the goal is to not be in the same place, but you don't know what that is even going to look like. So, you
No,
know
well, you're carving into something really heavy now because we're getting a lot of requests to workshop in particular on uncertainty, right? We have a strategy. We say be flexible, adaptable, comfortable with uncertainty, and not picking on younger people because I am an old guy, but we've got a couple of generations, and don't believe me. I mean, the data is pretty solid on this. That, and it's our own fault. But we caused a lot of anxiety and trepidation around the ideas of failure and uncertainty. Okay. And we've got to return to that. We've got to return to embracing this uncertainty. Think of it. All the best things in your life happen from periods of uncertainty or chaos, right? I mean, it's just the way it is. Without challenge, we don't get better. And how dull would life be, right, if we didn't have these challenges? I mean, it's nothing to live for if we're not constantly wanting to improve and learn and grow. And we don't have enough time in one lifetime. Some of my Asian masters were so cool because I don't know if I completely believe this. I don't know what I believe, but a lot of them were pretty dedicated believers in the idea of reincarnation, right? And I remember talking with one of them. I said, "Well, why do you think there's another life?" He says, "Because we can't get everything done in this one." I don't know if I've ever heard a better answer to that, but it's kind of cool. Yeah, this idea of uncertainty. We need to return to some level of comfort, not just comfort. I mean, uncertainty and its close cousin, adversity. We got to bring these T-shirts back. We made some T-shirts a while ago, and it said "Celebrate adversity." It's your opportunity to become the person you might not have ever imagined without it.
I
Right?
love that. I would wear that T-shirt.
We'll make sure you get one. We got to bring those out again.
Yeah.
But that's what it's all about. And again, I'm not preaching from the mountain. I'm preaching from the gutter because believe me, when I was at my worst in my drug experience, I was living in this old trailer out in the woods of Maine and I had money for dope, but didn't seem to have money for stupid things like food or heating oil or, things like that. And genuine poverty. Now that poverty was self-imposed. So I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me at all. I mean, I did that to myself, but poverty nonetheless. I didn't know a lot of the times whether I was going to eat or whether I was going to, freeze to death out there. But out of that, and I think this was embedding from my mom, really, I have to give her credit for this. Somewhere there was a voice that said, stop worrying about what you don't have and start looking at what you do have. And that was at a time when I had nothing, right? Now, of course, I'm sharing this with you with the benefit of hindsight. Our memories are only so reliable, right? There's moments that happen to us, and then we kind of link them together, and we come up with a pithy bit of philosophy like that. After some after further down the road. But anyways, it's still just as powerful. That's what I learned how to do. Now, do I forget about that from time to time? Sure. I'm an American kid. And one of the blessings we had a few years ago, we got to speak in Cuba, and we got to spend some time, in some pretty rough areas of Cuba. And that was an eye opener for somebody who had only lived in the United States. And they reinforced that philosophy, let me tell you, and those people do amazing things with what we would consider nothing. And the cliched example of it is, people always see the cars, right? The old cars that they keep going. Well, the ones who own their own cars, believe me, they take a lot of pride in them. Don't get me wrong. But having said that, they keep those cars going because they have to. Okay. Yeah. And they do it. It's amazing. They were so inspirational to me. Yeah. And that's another place to find inspiration, right? Get outside of where I'm so blessed to be able to travel now and go to these different places. You want to appreciate what you have, go someplace where they don't have it. Right. But the big thing is just it centers on gratitude, doesn't it? And simple gratitude practice that I do it very rare. I just did it actually yesterday. Just look around at the simplest things and just say thank you. You know, just say thank you for the meal that you have. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I think saying grace is a beautiful ritual, right? Just appreciate the fact that we have food today, that we have a shelter, we have warmth, that we have friends, that we have, people who care about us. No matter where you're going, man, no matter how little you have, this is what you're starting with right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
true.
you're going to achieve great things from that. And so if I can do it out of that beat up old trailer, and at a point where I was trying to kill myself, I'm one of these people. Like I said, I'm not sharing this story out of ego. I genuinely can say, look, if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's not easy. I'm not being trite about it. It's a hard trip, but if I can do it, you certainly can do it. And that's to
Jim,
whoever needs to hear that.
well, Jim, that was I feel like the epitome, the great best example of a transformative speech too. For anyone listening, everything that you just shared is very honest and genuine and from the heart. And you just gave that example of what it can mean to share openly and with transparency to help other people recognize what they're possible, what's possible for them and what their
Yeah.
abilities might be. So thank you for that, because I feel like you just put into practice what you were talking about initially. And I hope that, for our listeners, I hope that that resonates and gets everybody thinking, well, what about my journey might help
Mm.
inspire other people's, because yours is certainly an inspiration.
I appreciate you saying that, but I do want to make one thing very clear, and I always try to say this when I'm sharing that story. I hope. In fact, it's funny because when I'm sharing in more detail some of the experiences, one person came up to me after conference. She said, "I appreciate how comfortable you are sharing that story and how you introduced so much humor into it and made it more palatable." I said, "Listen, I'm not comfortable with it at all. I'm
Mhm.
ashamed of it. Okay." The humor is my way of coping with that. And it's the only way that I can share that story without, I'm going to laugh or I'm going to burst into tears thinking about all the opportunities and the time that I lost and wasted. Right. So that's my coping mechanism, but I'm glad it makes it palatable. But there's no glamour in leaving that life behind. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the least I could do for the people around me and for the community that, I was a part of. So, I hope people understand that. And that's not to, I was challenged by somebody recently who thought I was denigrating people that had addiction problems, although she wanted
Mm.
me to use different language for that. She thought even the word addiction was troublesome. It's my
Mm.
story. I was an addict.
Yeah.
Anybody else may use different terms. That's fine, but that's what I needed to hear. And I hope that doesn't come across as insensitive, but that's just, all I can do is share my perspective. And I welcome people challenging it for sure. But yeah, it's not to me, it's not to be glamorized. That's what we
Mm.
need to do in order to be of any use to the people around us, And
Absolutely.
yeah, That's how I feel about it. Feel free to disagree.
Well,
I'm not here to solve
no,
everybody's problems. I'm here to cause trouble, and we can talk about it. And maybe we'll find some answers out of that process, right?
well, I always welcome conversation with the audience too, in comments and whatnot. But
Right.
I want to highlight, not disagree, but highlight what you've gone through. That in your words, from the dropout to the
Hmm.
black belt to the sensei, it is that from the unglamorous to the grace and the journey of that. You have come from that unglamorous life, to use your word and rephrase it.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you're making it out to be anything than it is, and I think you're being open and honest. And so I want to highlight that, because what is transformation but a reversal, right? A
Yeah.
rebirth, or I like to think of the
Or
caterpillar and the
change of
butterfly.
course, right? Change of course. Yeah. No. And I, to spin it a little bit more positive too. This one of the reasons to embrace this process of transformation is you may be on an upward trajectory. Okay. Don't get too comfortable there. One of the, we just touched on uncertainty a little while ago. And again, psychologists and anthropologists now are really identifying that uncertainty is one of the markers for effective leadership, believe it or not. The
Mm,
cliched version is that a leader is so confident. So, well, genuine confidence, meaning confidence in your preparation, confidence in your abilities, right?
mm,
Not surety of an outcome.
yeah,
That's when people get into real trouble. That's when you can cross over into arrogance and blind ignorance, right?
absolutely.
So this idea of uncertainty, that leader, they found there's several studies that have just been done. Gallup did a terrific one. That leaders that question their own decisions, uh, seek opposing viewpoints, open to opposing viewpoints to challenge their thinking, right?
Mhm.
Leaders that embrace this idea of uncertainty are the ones who are the most effective. Kind of goes along with vulnerability too, doesn't it, to a degree?
Yeah.
So those are markers of effective leadership. Not that you want to come out and say, "Oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing." All these things have to be taken right in
Yeah.
in effective moderation,
Yeah.
not to the extreme. So that's it. But be open and question question yourself along the way. So if you're on that upward trajectory, maintain some healthy skepticism. Right, things are going the right way, but let's also plan for what other challenges can come and knock us off, or we might even find a better way. Just because I'm on a good path doesn't mean it's the best one. And so if we're always open to that process of always learning and and I tell you a quick story that highlights this. In martial arts, we call this. We actually have a name for this mindset. It's called beginner's mind. Now, beginner's mind is really the mind of the true master, as you think about it, right? The true master is never finished. The true mastery is, in fact, one of my masters told us that his definition of achieving a black belt was nothing more than the achievement of a good learning attitude. And he said, most of all, you learn how to learn about yourself. And now you can apply that continually in every aspect of your life. So, anyway, um, one of the cool things about coming out of out of the cesspool into the light was when I achieved my black belt, it was the best day of my life up to that time. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, it was the first time I really achieved anything meaningful, and certainly the first time I was recognized for achieving something meaningful. And when I came back from the test, they kind of give you a cheat belt at the test. So my master had a gift for me, and it was this beautiful heavyweight black belt. You can see it on somewhere on my website, and it was just the deepest, darkest shade of black. It was so beautiful. But he said, this thing's going to change over time if you stay in your life as a martial artist. He said, you're going to tie it and untie it thousands of times. You're going to get dragged across on a floor in it. You're going to sweat in it, bleed in it, cry in it, and all those things certainly came true. So over time, the belt it fades, it turns gray. That happens to the best of us. But also, more important, the black belt frays away. When it starts wearing out, the black belt frays away. Now, underneath, on purpose, there's another belt. It's a white belt. You see? So if you keep that belt over the years and that belt's fraying away, and you see that every time we tie that belt on is to remind us, right? Approach each day with a sense of wonder, curiosity, passion, enthusiasm. I want to be better at the end of today than I am beginning the day. That's beginner's mind. And like I said, that's the mind of the true master, right? So, hey, Ben Franklin was still reading on his deathbed.
I did not know that. That is,
Yeah, isn't that a cool? Yeah,
I love both those stories.
he wasn't done. He wasn't done.
He wasn't done. Do we know what he was reading? Do you know what he was reading?
No, I would be reading the autobiography of Ben Franklin, which I've read several times.
Oh, I love it. Jim, this has been a fabulous conversation. I know we could go for hours and hours, and obviously have to be mindful of time. I hope, well, first of all, I hope you'll come back and join me for more conversation.
I was going to say, let's make it the first, not the last, and we'd love to have you on Keep It Human and get you to share your adventures too.
I would love that as well. Yes,
Yeah.
let's definitely keep the conversation flowing, especially because we both appreciate that human connection. All of that said, though, you have multiple books and you have your own podcast and website. So I want to make sure that our audience can find you and learn more about you, work with you, perhaps, maybe even meet you for, I don't know, is it on the mat? Is that what you say?
Well, I'm pretty much done with that at this point. My martial arts now involves a 9-iron and a putter.
But you know what? We have stages and phases we go through as we grow.
But we can be pretty vicious with those things if we need to. Okay.
Oh yeah. Whether it's on the field or in the classroom, wherever we want to meet you.
Or a nice glass of wine, right?
Online. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How do you want people to reach out and connect with you?
Thanks for asking. I'm really easy to find, especially on LinkedIn and Facebook. We have some pretty active groups on LinkedIn. If you want me to come and work with your group or speak at a conference, the best place is thehumancentricleader.org. And we're really excited because we just launched. We're just a few people in it now. We're trying to get it started. I wanted a platform where everybody, especially after events, you can only scratch the surface in a short program, right? So I wanted a place where everyone could get together afterwards and talk and share ideas. Leadership is sharing. We need to share ideas. So we just launched something called the Keep It Human Network. And we've got a lot of cool programs coming up there. So that's keepithuman.network. That's pretty easy, huh?
Very easy. Thank you for that. Yeah. We'll have all that info below. But Jim, until we converse again and connect, thank you so much for joining me and our audience on Bad Bosses, Great Leaders podcast. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining for this conversation. Let us know what you thought in the comments below. And of course, we'll catch you on the next one.